Good afternoon, friends. I'm Allison Gampel, and I work as the Associate Director of Alumni Programs at York University. Welcome to you all, and thanks for being here. This is the first get-together of the 2021 GRADitude program, where alumni share their wisdom and experience with our newest grads and others who are interested in the topics, of course. An especially warm welcome to our newest grads, and for those of you who are heading into exams, we wish you good luck. We officially welcome you all to our 330,000 person extended family. So I'm a bit of a real estate junkie, so I'm really excited to be here today and to learn more about how Millennials and Gen Z can prepare for the post-pandemic housing market, which will feature our alumni expert, Ted Tsiakopoulos. As this event is virtual and we are not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that the following land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. If this is the case, please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and its current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I'm grateful for the opportunity to live and work on Treaty 13 land. For a bit of housekeeping before we get started, if at any time you need help with this experience, please feel free to click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and enter your question. We have a team here with us ready to help you. Today's session is in partnership with York University's Career and Education Development Center. Our Career and Education Development Center remains fully open to new alumni for 2 years after graduation, and I highly recommend visiting their website, careers.yorku.ca. My personal favorite of their tools is the What Can I Do With My Degree section. They have great webinars and drop-in sessions, and this remains open, as I said, to grads up until 2 years after graduation. Stick around till the end of the talk, because following our talk and our Q&A with our panelists, all attendees will be able to answer a poll question for a chance to win a $50 e-gift card to the York University bookstore. So stay tuned until the end for that. Now, before we get started, you each came here for a reason. And though we can't see you, we do want to do our best to get to know you and provide helpful advice and insight. So if you can use the Q&A function and just take a moment and answer for us, what do you hope to get out of this session today? Okay, so take a few minutes to type your response now. What do you hope to get out of the session? Okay, feel free to continue sharing things as ideas come up for you. But at this point, I'm honored to introduce to you our alumni speaker. Ted Tsiakopoulos is a professional economist and sought-after speaker with over 30 years of experience analyzing housing and financial markets. Over his professional career, his commentary and research have been widely quoted across major media outlets such as Money Magazine, BNN, CTV, and CBC. In June of 2020, he co-authored a book titled Property Trendsetters, highlighting how Gen Z needs to prepare for the economic and real estate disruptions that are coming. Ted received an undergrad and a master's degree in economics from York and also studied at the London School of Economics in the UK. So Ted, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Allison, and thank you to York University for this invite. I'm going to launch my presentation here very quickly. And let's hope this works. It should work. Okay, so maybe if someone can cue me that they're seeing the screen they should be seeing. Is everything?
We're seeing it. We're seeing it, Ted. You go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So again, thank you to York. This event is quite special in that it falls on my 25-year anniversary since leaving York in 1996. So I couldn't have picked a better group to be addressing on this very special milestone for me personally. So a bit about my journey. Okay, so let me just. It appears as though my something is stuck here and is not moving. Let me try something here. Yeah, I'm having problems here with advancing the slides. So let me see not sure why that's the case. Hold on a sec here.
I'm going to pop on and see if maybe I can. It suggested that maybe you relaunch it.
Okay, let me just try that. Yeah.
Well, technology has both been wonderful and tricky. It allows us to all come together and learn together, but the
So something.
Okay, so now
Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Here
It
we
was just
go.
stuck.
It's just
So
you're
let's
on,
try
I'm
this.
off.
Yeah, that's technology. Okay, so my journey very quickly. This period between 85, 86 to 95, 96 was a 10-year period in duration, but it felt like 50 years for myself. Now, why is that? Well, my first year of high school, 1985, 86, I had a passion, and my passion was to play soccer professionally in Canada. And, you know, I spent 90% of my time on soccer and only 10% of my time on academics, and it showed. I recall my first year of high school, I think my average was about 55% in all my courses. So needless to say, my parents were fuming. My immediate family was trying to convince me to drop this passion. Because it's not really very lucrative at the time in the 80s. Playing soccer in Canada professionally wasn't lucrative. So were they right? Were these voices right? Absolutely, they were right. However, I had blinders on. I was oblivious to this. And then a life-changing moment came about. A few months later, we took a vacation to Greece, and there I was sitting at a dinner table, waiting for our dinner at a restaurant. And from the side of my eye, I kid you not, I saw kids that couldn't have been any older than 8 years of age bussing tables, yes, with sweat running down their foreheads, and waiters barking at them. And you know that moment, that moment there has stayed with me for a very long time. What was running through my head at that moment was, I certainly don't want to be doing this in the rest of my life. This isn't something I want to see in my future. And of course, we came back to Toronto, and a year later, I put a plan in place. And I was fortunate enough to have discovered a second passion, and that was economics. I was very fortunate that I had some great teachers in high school, and I fell in love with economics at a young age, probably at the age of 16. And so what I did was I put the PPP principle in place, a plan to achieve my passion of working as an economist. And I stayed persistent. I stayed committed to that plan. So this PPP principle has served me quite well. We will come back to it in the course of this presentation for sure, but extremely, extremely helpful in building my career and reaching my goals. So I just want to highlight some of the disclaimers here before I jump into the heart of my presentation. first disclaimer is, or background information is, I'm going to be referencing Gen Y, and these are Canadians who were born anywhere between 1980 and 1996. Gen Z is the generation that followed thereafter, young Canadians that were born between 1996 and 2010. And by the way, the focus of my chapter in the book was actually on Gen Z, but certainly a lot of insights in this presentation that address both generations. Disruptions that I actually talk about in the book and I reference here today are not meant to be exhaustive, okay? I've chosen to focus on 3 disruptions that I believe are important in the next decade, but it's certainly not an exhaustive list. So I just wanted to make that note. And solutions to the housing challenge, those solutions don't just fall on the shoulders of Gen Y and Gen Z. They need a support network around them. So whether it be parents offering guidance, whether it be educators, realtors, builders, or the broader community at hand, I think this is a joint responsibility to set these next generations up for success. And finally, and this is my favorite disclaimer, I get the opportunity to speak my mind, right? So, so this doesn't happen often. The opinions expressed here are my own. They do not reflect my employer. I want to be very clear. The information that is presented is just that. It's information. It's not investment advice. It's not financial advice. If you need advice, financial advice, I would reach out to a licensed financial advisor to help you along the way. So those are some keynotes I wanted to get out of the way up front. So what is the housing problem? We need to understand the problem before we can come up with solutions, right? And it's not just a Canadian problem, it's a global problem, right? So on the ownership housing front, we've got a real problem, and it's called affordability. Affordability has eroded dramatically. Okay, it has gotten worse. And so what I'm showing you here and what I'm measuring on the vertical axis is really the required income to buy an average resale home. That's what's in the numerator, and in the denominator is the actual income earned by that household. So that ratio, when it's below 1, is indicative of a very affordable market. When that ratio is above 1, it's indicative of a very unaffordable market. And you could see the history here, right? The late 80s were characterized as a fairly unaffordable markets here in Ontario. And I'm using Ontario as an example here. I'll show you the Canadian picture in a moment. But you could see what happened. Obviously, a recession hit in the early 1990s. I felt it as a student looking for work, for sure. Interest rates started to move lower through the 1990s. Prices moved lower. The market became quite affordable. And then, of course, 2015 rolled around and the market became increasingly less affordable. And you could see what's happened since 2015. Today, you need a required income to buy an average affordable resale home, which is 30% higher than the actual income you're earning. So you could see what's happened here in the last few years. Now, the affordability problem isn't the only problem, and affordability isn't just a problem for homeowners or prospective homeowners who want to buy a home. We need to look at the problem in a more holistic way. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is the percentage of Canadian households that are in core housing need. What in the world does core housing need mean? It means that they've met one of 3 conditions. That not only is their rental property or owner home basically unaffordable, but they're living in crowded conditions, or the quality of the housing isn't what it needs to be. Okay. So if you meet one of those 3 conditions, you're in core housing need. And you can see here, for Canada as a whole, about 30% of households were in core housing need as per the 2016 census, right? And those ratios weren't that low, that lower for millennials aged between 25 to 44. And the other key takeaway here is that if you were renting, you were 4 to 5 times more likely to be in core housing need. So we've got a broader problem here beyond affordability, that households are living in overcrowded conditions, and the quality of housing is certainly a challenge and an issue. Now, the other problem isn't just about affordability, quality, and space. It's also about, um, you know, uh, um, income and wealth inequality, as well as the distribution of wealth across ages. You may have heard globally that the big issue now is the increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots. So the key takeaway here is, when looking at this slide, is that while Gen Y and Z are actually more educated and earn more income than Generation X, my generation, and boomers who were of similar age, years ago, um, the fact is that Gen Y and Gen Z are carrying more debt, and that is showing up in their balance sheet. So when you look at the debt to asset ratio for individuals under the age of 44, you could see here that their debt to asset ratio is much higher. They're carrying more debt, and obviously, the denominator here, the asset, isn't as big. Now, part of it is they're younger, and we're not comparing apples to apples here. It's going to take time for them to build some assets. However, if we restrict access to home ownership, that just amplifies the problem, because we do know that over longer periods of time, residential real estate has contributed to the wealth of Canadian households. So obviously, we need to look at this in a more holistic way. It's not just about affordability, quality, and space. It's also about what are we doing to this picture here in terms of the distribution of wealth. So what are some causes? If we look at just affordability, what has caused affordability to erode? Well, clearly we're not bringing on enough supply of housing, and we're not bringing in, bringing on the mix of housing that households require. And some of it is due to the fact that it takes a long time for a development application to go through City Hall, right? There's a lot of red tape. Okay, that's one problem. The other problem is in some ways our zoning is quite archaic. It hasn't adjusted with the times. There are still neighborhoods in a place like Toronto, you wouldn't believe it, but even in a place like Toronto, still neighborhoods where you can't build above 4 stories, 5 stories. Incredible, right? Crazy. We say we've densified. We're nowhere near fully densifying and reaching capacity. So zoning needs to change in some neighborhoods. And then this crazy word that I just hate, NIMBYism, not in my backyard, right? So a lot of households, boomer households, blocking the construction of housing because somehow that's going to impact the value of their home, right? So this has been a real problem. Scarcity of land, we're running out of land to build on, right? And in some ways, builders that want to build rental housing, they're competing for that land with developers who want to build condos for people to live in. So they're facing a challenge in bringing new rental housing online. And of course, this is really close to my heart. Record low interest rates have caused a lot of damage as well. Record low interest rates have pushed debt higher, and that has fueled house prices even further. More to say about this later. Aging demographics, okay? So how is aging demographics contributing to the affordability problem? Well, we know that as people age, they don't move. And a good chunk of the single detached housing is locked up, largely because boomers are aging and they are not moving. So that supply is not flowing onto the market. That is creating some challenges for generations that are following, right? Speculation. Is this a problem? We're sort of looking at this. Money laundering, another issue that we're trying to get more data on. This is another factor. Weak productivity and digitization in the new construction industry. This is an issue. Productivity in the construction sector is lagging productivity elsewhere across the economy, largely because builders have not embrace technology in there when they build homes. So a lot more to say about this in a moment. And finally, people don't just buy housing as shelter. They buy housing um, because they see it as a good investment. And that investment mindset has also fueled house prices. upward. It has also fueled rents higher as well. So what are some solutions, or how are countries responding to this? I'll tell you, New Zealand is leading the pack here. New Zealand has implemented quite a few solutions to the affordability problem. They've banned foreign ownership. They've increased down payments. If you want to buy a home and you want to live in that home, you have to put 20% down. If you're an investor, you have to put 30% down. And what we're also seeing is that the Prime Minister in New Zealand is recommending the central bank include asset prices like housing in the CPI basket. So when they're trying to achieve price stability, don't ignore house prices, right? So whether you agree or disagree with this direction that New Zealand has taken, boy, oh boy, you got to admire the Prime Minister here for her leadership, for her decisiveness, and for her courage. New Zealand is clearly paving the way and leading the way here. So that's the here and now. What can we expect over the next decade? What are those disruptions, right? I've just, I've highlighted that there are three. The first that I'm going to focus on is the digital economy and the acceleration of the digitization of the economy. So why is that a disruption? What does it mean? How do we manage that risk? We'll look at that in a moment. Household and government debt. This is another disruption. Why is it a disruption, and how do we manage this? We'll have a look at that. And finally, demographics. As I mentioned a few slides ago, population is aging. That will pose some challenges moving forward. And how do we deal with those challenges? So we'll look at each one of these individually. Let's begin with the digital disruption. Let's look at some quick facts here. So the digital revolution follows other industrial revolutions, okay? Namely, steam engine, right? Secondly, of course, assembly lines and mass production. And finally, the most recent disruption or industrial revolution, the computer chip. So this is really the fourth industrial revolution in the last couple hundred years. Now, what's interesting here is that all these industrial revolutions had a common characteristic. They increased the supply of goods and services. They disrupt labor markets. They reduce inflation and interest rates, and they push debt even higher. Okay, so they all have this similar effect. From 2010 to 2017, the nominal GDP of digital economic activities grew by 40.2%, far outpacing the growth of the broader economy over that period, which grew by 28%. So this is really a growing segment of the economy and will continue to grow. So rising electronic commerce, slower GDP growth, weak productivity up to this point, an aging population will support a pickup in digital investment among producers. In fact, some estimates suggest that the acceleration of digital investments could quite easily displace up to 40%, 40 to 50% of jobs in the next decade. So that's huge, right? So it's not to say that we will not be creating jobs. We will, but the rate of displacement of jobs, we won't be able to keep pace with that in terms of how many jobs will be replaced. It's really a challenge that will likely be front and center in the next decade. And previous industrial revolutions impacted blue-collar works. This one is a bit different. This one will hit white-collar jobs, okay? Not only will you be competing against domestic labor, you will be competing against international labor because of technology, AI, robotics. Finally, as companies invest in digital technology, that should boost productivity growth. It should, in fact, lead to a shorter work week. Employers will find that employees become more productive, that they can achieve results in a 3-day work week versus a 5-day work week. So the days of being employed by one employer are likely behind us. The future labor market is likely going to be one where you'll have multiple employers. So you're going to be compensated based on your project, whatever that may be. And so if we think that the gig economy is going to die away, think again. I think the gig economy, which has been focused in the arts mostly, I think that's going to expand out to other sectors of the economy. So you're going to have to probably juggle a number of employers in the future because of the digital disruption. So how do we combat the digital disruption? Well, the school curriculum needs to adjust. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that we need to develop skills which will be resilient in the face of change. So in order for us to achieve higher purchasing power, higher income, we need to develop those skills that will not be disrupted, right? And when we achieve that income that we want, that we have as a passion, as a goal, we need not just skills that are going to land a job that pays enough. We need to be able to manage that income when we earn it. So we need more education in the financial literacy space, and this needs to be introduced very early. I would say, if possible, public school, elementary school, at the latest, middle school. But we need to make it a mandatory part of the curriculum. What kinds of skills will be in demand? Problem solvers, critical thinkers, social and emotional intelligence will remain resilient in the face of change here. So jobs in mediation, consulting, health services, IT, education, trades, even sports. My nephew is great at baseball. He loves baseball. It's his passion, okay, as an example. But others around him are suggesting that he consider maybe university, maybe another passion. My message to him is pursue your passion. If that's your passion, build a plan to get to what you want to achieve and stay committed to it, because it's going to be very hard for, hey, a skillful sports athlete to be replaced by robotics. What types of jobs are in decline? Clerical, or will be in decline: clerical, administrative, transportation, some finance related jobs, some building trades jobs. Those task oriented, routine type of jobs will be in decline, and some would argue we're already seeing that during the pandemic. All to say that some of these jobs are likely not coming back. So I've talked a little bit about the digital challenge, a digital world that's likely going to translate into slower economic growth, perhaps even more modest income growth. Perhaps we need to juggle a number of jobs to make ends meet. But we're also going to be an environment of low interest rates. And we know that low interest rates, or at least I'll show you in a moment, that low interest rates fuel debt, right? So we need to manage that. But in order to manage what's coming, we need to understand, how did we get here, right? How did we get to a world of close to 0% interest rates? And how did we get to a world where debt is going through the roof, right? Well, globalization had a role to play here, right? And not just globalization in the trade of goods and services, but also globalization in capital, okay? We know that post 1995, the world became a freer world in terms of trade. Recall, the Asia Pacific region was integrated into the World Trading Organization. That fueled significant shifts in production, right, away from the developed to the developing world. Costs of production fell. That translated into lower prices. In turn, that fed lower inflation and lower interest rates. But lower interest rates were also a result of capital flows, the liberalization of capital, right? If capital has the ability to shift from one part of the world to the next, and technology made that happen, that means that capital will go where yield is highest, where the return on money is highest. And we've increasingly seen capital flowing westward into developed markets, and that has pushed bond prices up, and it has pushed long-term bond yields lower. So that has had an impact on debt. We also know electronic commerce contributed to lower inflation and lower interest rates. We know that getting rid of brick and mortar made companies more efficient. Their costs have come off. You know, the Amazon business model is a great example of that. And producers have been able to pass on lower costs in the form of lower prices. That has restrained inflation and put downward pressure on interest rates as well. Inflation targeting. Central banks post 1995 tied their monetary policy to keeping inflation stable. And some real great benefits resulted from that, no question about it. But there were some side effects. And the side effects have been that, you know, sometimes success creates issues as well, challenges. It has meant inflation expectations have come off. It has meant interest rates have been probably a bit lower than would have otherwise been the case. Overnight, interest rates have collapsed, and I'll show you a visual of that. And again, it has also contributed to the debt problem. Aging of the population. Think of Japan here. As the population ages, they begin to spend less and save more. So there's been a glut of savings that has accumulated that has also depressed interest rates as well. So why are low interest rates such a problem, such a challenge? Well, you can think of low interest rates as fueling less savings, right? The incentive to save, and this is what I'm showing you here in this graph, has declined over the last 4 decades. So as central banks have cut that overnight interest rate closer to zero, you could see what's happened to the savings rate. It has collapsed. Savings rates used to be in double-digit territory. And they've moved lower. Now, we have seen savings rates move up in the last year, but I'd be willing to bet that that is a temporary phenomenon. That is really a result of people becoming extremely cautious. I suspect that we are going to move back to what this sort of picture has shown over the last few decades. And you can see higher interest rates here do result in higher savings. But with rates moving lower and savings moving down, of course, this has fueled higher debt. And I'm going to be quite frank with you. Not all debt is bad debt. Mortgage debt, I would consider good debt. And I would say it's good debt because it is secured by an asset, an appreciating asset, which is real estate. So, so for that reason, I'm plotting interest rates against the debt to asset ratio to correct for that, right? To acknowledge that some debt is good debt. So I'm giving you what the picture is relative to the debt to asset ratio as interest rates move lower, but you can still see that that debt to asset ratio moves up when rates move down. And you can think of interest rates like, I hate to say this, marijuana, right? The more marijuana you give someone, the more they'll take. But just because marijuana is widely available doesn't mean you should take it. I've been offered marijuana in my younger years. I've denied it. You are in control, not the people selling it, right? Not the people setting interest rates or lending money. You are in control. You're in the driver's seat, okay? So what does the savings life cycle kind of reveal? What is the typical pattern or behavior that we should be seeing over one's life? And that's what I'm showing you here. So over one's life, the average household would like to smooth their consumption. They want to keep consumption relatively stable. And that's that blue horizontal line in this graph. But depending on your age, obviously, you're going to be either taking on more debt or you're going to be saving more. So at early ages, when you're in school, in college, or university, your income can't match the amount of consumption that you want to undertake. So there is some borrowing that is happening at young ages, right? And then as you graduate and you land that first job and you're earning income, income begins to grow at a slightly faster rate than the growth in consumption. And so you start to build savings in your peak earning years. And then as you transition to retirement, obviously income may not be growing as quickly. In retirement, you're beginning to tap into that savings that you've accumulated. And in essence, you are dissaving. So this is really the natural flow of savings and consumption. What have we seen in reality? Well, we've seen anything but this. In fact, what we have seen is that savings have not been pro-cyclical. In other words, savings haven't been going up in good economic times. Savings have been going down when the economy has been healthy. People have been spending more than they have been earning. And what that has meant is that they have not built an emergency fund for those rainy days. So what should happen is you save more during good economic times. You build a piggy bank and you use that money in bad economic times to manage those disruptions and those risks. And the best example I can give you where we haven't done that is during the pandemic in the past year. So, as I say, in this graph, I say mind the gap. Excuse me for the language. I spent a lot of time in London, England, and that seemed to be an image I would see very frequently in the subway in London. But what I'm saying here is let's shrink this gap. Even though the theory suggests that it's completely rational to take on debt at a younger age, I'm going to show you how you shouldn't do that or why you shouldn't do that and how to avoid that. What I'm suggesting here is shrink that gap as much as you can. So how do you do it? A plan. I talked about building a plan earlier, the PPP principle. Here's how it flows into our conversation. A budget. A budget is a plan. Start early, okay? And I say start at the age of 15. I say 15 because on average, we land our first job at 15. We start to earn income. We need a plan. A budget is that plan. It's the foundation. If you have any hope of saving money, investing, or managing debt, you better have a budget in place. And I love this quote. And I love this quote because here's what it says. The vast majority of those who have a budget stay within budget. In fact, 95% of people who have a budget stay within budget. So that's the value, right? Which suggests that if more Canadians began budgeting, there would be an overall increase in the proportion of Canadians that are living within their means. Very powerful statement from Statistics Canada's Financial Capability Survey. Here's another piece of research that I love. I love this quote. Budgeting helps consumers behave adaptively, right? They respond to constraints with more priority, right? When you have a budget, income is a constraint. You know it's a constraint. You're trying to live within your means, right? So impulsive shopping is likely avoided because of that. Now, what percentage of Canadians have a budget? Well, less than half. You could see what's happened here. And I would argue that these numbers are probably a lot lower than what is being reported. Okay, and I say they're lower than what is being reported because nobody wants to say they don't have a budget, right? You underreport what's really happening. And what's interesting in this graph is the following. The households and people that are saying they have a lower likelihood of having a budget are the ones that have faced the biggest challenge during the pandemic, right? I'm not saying here for a moment that a budget is going to solve all problems. I'm saying it's one solution of many solutions. But you can see here that non-couples, low-income people, Indigenous, the Indigenous community, they're the ones that are reporting less likelihood of having a budget, and they are precisely the group that has reported to have been facing a lot of challenges over the past year with COVID-19. So, I've talked about low interest rates and the impact that low interest rates have had on savings and debt. But I'll tell you, low interest rates and no budget is a toxic cocktail, okay? Now, has anyone tried to mix red wine with orange juice? Well, when I was young, I tried doing that, and I'll tell you, it doesn't taste very nice. It's toxic. Okay, so when we are in a low interest rate environment, and we are not planning, and we have not created a budget, that is a toxic mix. And there was a real life-changing moment. Second one at the dinner table. I shared the one in Greece. I'll share the other one right now. 1976, I believe, 77. We were having dinner at the dinner table in my family home here. I think I was about, what was I, 7, 8 years of age. We're eating, and I'm looking over my shoulder, and I notice my mother writing something on a dinner napkin, of all things, scribbling something down. I turned over to her and I said, "Well, what are you writing?" It seemed quite odd. She was writing something on a dinner napkin. And she turned to me with stress in her eyes and said, "I'm just making sure that all of the income that's coming in is paying for all of our expenses." And that moment stuck with me until today, actually. And that was a blunt message to me that we need to strike a balance between consumption and savings. My parents came to this country with no formal education, with $5 in their pocket, with no technology, no computer, really no education, and yet they were engaged in budgeting. So if they can do it, the message is anybody can do it. Um, this cocktail mix means that it's easy to get emotionally hijacked. So perfect example, the 2015, 2016, 2017 housing market here in Toronto. Interest rates were dropping, prices were escalating, people were jumping into housing like it was going out of style. Prospective buyers were going to these open houses, bidding, competing for a home, bidding, putting offers in with no plan, no exit strategy, no maximum price that they can afford. Guess what? They got emotionally hijacked, and they took on a bigger mortgage than they would have otherwise have done. So a budget keeps you honest, keeps you in line. This cocktail mix almost always results in higher debt. Well, we know that. I showed you evidence of that. One thing that's helped me is when I'm shopping, I convert everything that I would like to purchase into labor hours. How much is it costing me in terms of labor hours? I like doing that for more, consumption that's more of a want than a need. Okay, and psychologists will tell you that if you convert anything to labor hours, that will take the emotion out of that purchase decision and will allow you to think rationally. Do I need this, or is this a want? Try it out. It's helped me along the way. I convert everything into labor hours, right? How many labor hours am I giving up to buy this good or service? It's great. It helped me. Try it out. Um, Build a monthly budget, okay? Monthly. Track your incomes, track your expenses. Start early in life. Remember the PPP principle, right? A budget is a plan, okay? I started at the age of 15. That's when I started working. That's when I started earning an income or an allowance. Start at a very young age. There's remarkable resources online that I can direct you to build a budget. It can be as simple as a dinner napkin, okay? A dinner napkin, for crying out loud. It doesn't have to be complicated. Sure, you want to eventually transfer it into Excel, but doesn't have to be complicated. What can policymakers do to help with this problem, this affordability problem? So I want to turn it very quickly to a polling question. So can we do that? So here's a question. What can policymakers do to help improve rental and ownership affordability? Take a few seconds and post your opinion on this question. Maybe we'll, in the interest of time, we'll share some of these results later in the presentation. I'm just wondering, could we get rid of is it possible to get rid of this box? If not, not to worry, but maybe we'll share. Thank you. Okay, so low interest rates, a no budget, a toxic cocktail for sure. And my computer has, I spoke too soon. Let's now move to the third disruption, the demographic challenge. We know that the population is aging, and here is some evidence of it. You could see here that by 2030, the proportion of the Ontario population that will be above the age of 65 skyrockets here, right, to almost 25%. No question, over the next decade, population will begin to age and accelerate. So what does this mean? Well, it means that boomers are not just aging, they're living longer. Why is this a challenge? Well, we know that millennials, age 25 to 34, a decade from now, or even sooner, will be in this 35 to 44 year old age category. And we know that they won't be in their first time buyer years. They're likely going to be buying a home for a second time or renting a home for a second time. Perhaps they have a family, right? More kids. They will need more space. And so with an aging population, we know that that could lock up a big chunk of the single detached housing market. And so that means less choice for millennials or even future Gen Y, Gen Z population who's looking to buy a low-rise home. So that's going to be a challenge for millennials over the next 5 to 10 years. For Gen Z, that may be 15 to 24 years of age today, in 10 years, they will be in that first-time buyer age category, 25 to 34. Well, we know that they will be competing, and they will be competing with immigrants coming into the country. We know immigrants are between the ages of 25 to 34 as well, and they will be buying or renting homes for the first time. So, um, that's going to be a challenge for Gen Z as well. The other big challenge with the aging story is a lot of aging members of our population are employed in the trades industry. And we're not replacing those people quick enough. And so there's going to be a labor supply crunch in trades that could quite easily push the cost of production higher. And that could filter into the housing market in the form of higher house prices. So this is another factor that's going to impact not just the space requirements of households, but also affordability. So how do we combat this demographic disruption? Well, we need to densify. We need to increase density, right? In a number of single family neighborhoods. We need to update archaic zoning. We need to build more missing middle housing. So we seem to, we build singles and we build shoebox condos, but we don't build enough bigger condos, right? And we know we don't build enough townhomes, row homes. So we need more of this missing middle type of housing that's going to satisfy the space requirements of millennials and Gen Z in the next few years. We need Gen Y and Z to be out there lobbying against NIMBYism, okay? You guys represent a big chunk of the population. In fact, a few years ago, millennials became the biggest pool of the population, basically exceeding boomers, right? That's huge. That's political power, right? You guys need to be out there lobbying against NIMBYism and encouraging more density. More density means more choice, means obviously more supply, and likely this has the impact of restraining prices. We need to strike a better balance with respect to immigration. Yeah, we've recently seen immigration targets move up. That's great. We need more immigrants to offset the aging segment of our population, but we need to ensure that we have enough housing, that we can house new immigrants that are coming in. So we need to look at this in a more holistic way. Okay, it's not just about opening up the border to 500,000 immigrants. We need to ensure that not only can we house our domestic population, but we'll be able to house new people that come in. The construction sector needs to embrace technology, right? I mentioned that trades, there's a supply crunch, right? People are aging. We don't have enough tradespeople. So we need to use technology a little more. Okay, and there's different things we can do. We need to convert the discussion of building homes to manufacturing homes. We need to have more of a manufacturing mindset. And this is where modular housing comes in, because when we build modular homes, we're using a manufacturing mindset. We're using technology. We're keeping costs down, which in turn helps restrain the increase in house prices and rents. What is CMHC doing? Some efforts here on the part of CMHC to address the housing affordability challenge. We have invested almost $50 billion in a national housing strategy to build more affordable housing. That's how we are addressing the housing problem. We are selling federal lands below market to developers to build more homes on. As you know, the cost of land is a big cost that goes into the price of a home. So we are selling, providing federal lands below cost, in some cases for free, to developers to build on and to keep prices and costs in check. Okay, to build more affordable housing. We've also recently launched the first-time buyer initiative you may have heard about, which is a shared equity type of program. So basically, if you want to buy a resale home and if you meet certain conditions, if you put 5% down, the government will match that by putting another 5% down. So that increases your down payment without you taking on more debt. It keeps your monthly payment a lot lower than it would have otherwise been, allows you to build equity faster. If you buy a new home, that help increases to about 10%. But a number of mortgage loan insurance programs as well out there that CMHC provides for both affordable and market housing. So, we could certainly get into some of this during question time. I'm looking at the time, and in closing, March is a special month for me, as it should be for all of us. There have been some great inspirational stories in the month of March. If you can recall, 1 year ago, the pandemic struck, and frontline health workers were leading the battle against COVID-19. Their actions suggested that freeing the world from this disease was worth sacrificing one's life. If this isn't a heroic act, I don't know what is. March is also a special month for me personally. My ancestors had a similar dilemma 200 years ago. Their dilemma, their question was, is revolting in the name of freedom a big enough passion, right? Knowing that we can lose our lives and that our children's lives are at risk. Well, they also chose freedom. So what is the key takeaway? What is the key takeaway here when we look at both of these events? Well, the key takeaway is that there is a hero in all of us, right? Human beings are resilient in the face of change, and I have every confidence that you will be as well, given some of the disruptions that face us in the next few years. So, in closing, find your passion, build a plan to realize it, to achieve it, and remain persistent and committed to it. And great things will happen even in this uncertain world that we are embarking in. So best wishes to all. Thank you and God bless.
Ted, thank you. Thank you very much for being here and for sharing all of this insight. I'll ask that you stop your screen share, and we'll move into the Q&A section of our conversation today. We'd also like to welcome Ted's colleague at the CMHC, Robert Taylor. So Robert, please feel free to turn on your camera. Nice to see you, Robert. Okay, to our audience and to our panelists, may I ask if we can do 10 minutes of Q&A and go a little bit longer than we'd anticipated? Sound good? Okay, so we were supposed to end, well, in a minute, but we have some great questions and would like to give that time. So I'd like to start by asking, you talked about renting and buying. What are the pros and cons of renting and buying? What should young people be doing now?
So I think the first step is build a budget. Um, if you don't have one, have a budget and ensure that you have enough savings to jump into renting or owning. Um, there's nothing wrong with taking extra time to build some savings. It makes a heck of a difference. When I think about buying a home, putting 10% down, 15% down is huge versus putting 5% down. I mean, you can cut your mortgage insurance premium by half in most cases, and it allows that monthly payment to be a lot lower than it would have otherwise been. So I think that, it all comes back to building a plan, building a budget.
And you mentioned that there's some tools that you had in mind as recommendations for what one could use to build a budget. Do you want to share some of those?
Sure. The Financial Consumer Agency of Canada is the federal watchdog, really the leader in terms of financial literacy nationally. They've got some wonderful resources online. I encourage people to visit their website. Just some wonderful resources. There are other references in the book that I encourage people to go to as well.
Thank you. So if I'm like a 23-year-old and I have my first job, I know I look 23, but that was a couple decades ago. So I want to buy my first home. Where do I start?
So there's some wonderful information on CMHC's website, the step-by-step guide to buying a home. It's a great guide that gives you a checklist of some of the things that you need to think about, that you need to do. And everybody doesn't have to own a home. Sometimes renting makes more sense. And there's little, if any, stigma in renting a home versus the stigma that existed decades ago. So don't feel this need that I have to buy a home immediately. Maybe it makes sense to rent, build some savings, right? Sock away those savings that you're earning on a monthly basis by renting versus owning. Maybe invest some of those proceeds as well, and build a pool of money that you can use as a down payment later if owning a home is what you want as a passion, right? So I think there's some wonderful resources online on the CMHC website that prospective renters, buyers can tap into. Yeah.
Great. Given how expensive houses are right now, would you recommend that people wait? Like, will it go down or will it just keep climbing?
Um, I think in the immediate term, in the absence of any policy intervention, I think we're likely going to see prices continue to climb. I applaud the Prime Minister of New Zealand for what she is doing. Um, I think that if things continue to heat up the way they have, we're likely going to see some intervention. I think what policymakers are waiting to see happen is, does the recovery broaden out beyond just housing? And if it does, it will give them confidence to step in and cool the housing market down. The last thing you want to do is step in, cool the housing market if it's the only engine driving the economy. So I think they're going to be looking for clues that this recovery is broadening out. But boy, we really need to do a rethink of monetary versus fiscal policy. What ammunition should we be using during times of crises? And I think the New Zealand Prime Minister, you disagree with her direction, but she's opening up a can of worms, but she's opening up the right can of worms, and then she's asking the right questions. That we need to rethink this policy of low interest rates a bit more.
Right. So I'm going to read a question coming in from our audience from Rana, who's asking, would you recommend paying off an OSAP loan in a lump sum or using that money to invest in a property and paying off the loan over time?
I want to bring in my colleague Robert um, and have him sort of address part of that, or what he can address, and maybe I'll step in as well. Robert is I was looking at his credentials the other day, and he's very qualified to answer these kinds of questions. But Robert, over to you.
Thanks, Ted. Yeah, as my financial planner hat's coming on, I've been a financial planner for almost 15 years. So that's a great question. Any debt, I heard Ted say in his presentation that mortgage debt is considered a good debt. I would agree wholeheartedly with that statement. So OSAP loans, in my opinion, is also a good debt. And the reason I say it's a good debt is because it's an investment in education, which hopefully will result in some future increases in earnings. Whether to hold the debt or to pay it off and then purchase, there are pros and cons to both sides. So if you were to hold the debt and buy the house now, it's going to reduce the amount of purchase price because when it's calculated how much you can afford in terms of home, it brings in all the payments that you're currently making on any debts that you currently have outstanding. If you pay those off, it could result in a little bit more purchase price, a little bit more room, or something that meets your needs a little better. So it really depends on your budget, your situation, what you can afford. But any debt that's high interest debt, in the case of student loans, which usually are for the most part lower interest rate debt, I would go to the high interest debt first if you have it. So if you have a credit card with a balance or something like that, that would be my recommendation.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense. Going to take a question coming in from Yeji, who's asking, with increasing remote work and increasing house prices in BC and Ontario, is it safe to assume that there will be spillage to other provinces? Would it put downward price pressure on BC and Ontario or increase price pressure on the other provinces?
So, we are seeing a broad-based increase in house prices right across Canada. So we're already seeing that. I mean, who would have thought Atlantic Canada prices would be growing at a double-digit rate? And supply is, one could argue that there's enough supply there, yet prices are still growing. So it really speaks to we need to rethink our policy on interest rates and on money, and we need to manage demand in the short run. Supply is a problem longer term. Supply is a problem in the short run because it takes time for supply to adjust. But we also need to keep our eye on the demand side, and we need to manage that side of the housing market. So to answer the question, we are seeing spillover as we speak. I mean, it's broader than what it was back in 2015, 2016, 2017. I mean, everything is moving up. So as I say, wouldn't at all be surprised later this year if we see some type of intervention if things continue along this path.
Thank you for that. With regards to some of the NIMBY conversation that you shared in your presentation, a question coming in from our audience is, why would anyone want those developments in their neighborhoods when they offer nothing to the existing communities? Can you comment on that?
I guess we always hear members of the boomer community or boomers generally saying, hey, policymakers need to step in. They need to make housing more affordable. We need more supply, and yet they're the last. They're on the front lines of the NIMByists. Who are blocking new development. That is precisely the point. We need more new development. We need more supply. More supply helps restrain prices or the growth in prices, right? Prices are a lot lower than they would have otherwise been in the absence of more density. So, there's been wonderful examples around the world of how density contributes so much to a community, right? And it contributes so much to climate change, if you really think about it. Because I'm sure most of you have seen the 15-minute city, right? Where you can actually do everything, go everywhere within 15 to 20 minutes. We need to worry about broader issues as well, not just affordability, but what impact are we having on climate, on the environment? What are we going to leave as a legacy to future generations? So let's look at this problem holistically, is what I'm saying.
Makes a lot of sense. So a question coming in from Tenzin is, can you talk about the grim house price forecast CMHC published a few months back? What were the key contributing factors for the model, and what went against the assumptions for the forecast?
Right. So, you know, here we were last March, April, in the midst of a pandemic, and it seemed like the sky was falling. Um, I think that there are a few things that could have been done a little better from our end. I think, first of all, uh, a 9 to 20% correction in house prices. It was really a call from peak to trough. And I think what probably in hindsight, what we should have done was focus on annual average prices. What's happening to those? That's what people understand. And I think that the message was blurred. And I think a lot of people took that message of 9 to 18% drop as that the average annual price was dropping by that amount, but that's not what we were saying. So the communication could have been a little better from our end for sure. Um, the other point I want to make is that CMHC, we came out with a couple of scenarios, a high and a low scenario. And I think that at some point there, we began to put more weight on the low scenario. Um, that was a bit of a risky proposition in the sense that, we were in a fairly uncertain world at the time. And, we also knew that governments were stepping in with income support programs. So, I think we should have probably stuck to our guns and really put as much weight on the high scenario as we did the low scenario. I think we shifted gears a bit, and I think we probably shouldn't have done that. But I think for the most part, what was underestimated was um, the fact that you know incomes for mid to high paying jobs held up quite well. Those jobs weren't hit. It was really the jobs at the lower end that got hit. And of course, people at the lower end are not buying homes, right? Or are not thinking about buying homes, or do not own homes. They're actually in the market, they're renting, or they're thinking about renting. So really, one segment of the market got hit, not the broader segment. So understanding those labor market dynamics probably would have made a little more of a difference in our call, I think. But as I say, forecasting is not crystal balling, right? There are risks to every forecast, and yeah. So hopefully I've answered that.
Did, thank you. And there was a part two from the same audience member who asked the question, who said, "You mentioned that our economy will transition into the digital economy. What foundation does the Canadian economy have for these sectors to grow?"
So we do, obviously, the technology side of our economy isn't certainly as big as what it is south of the border. But we have seen a lot of innovations, um, whether it's in the artificial intelligence world or robotics, even in the construction sector. We've seen some companies come out with a trades builder suit that allows construction workers to, complete a task much quicker. So we're seeing some innovations in a number of sectors, and I think that is set to grow and will grow in the next decade. Um, but one thing that we really need to start seeing is there's just seems to be a lot of capital being invested in real estate, and we need to start seeing more of that capital being invested in innovation, in capital spending to help boost our productivity. I think the risk of seeing all this money flooding the real estate market is that we fall behind on the productivity side and in terms of competitiveness as well. So I think that's going to shift over the next 5 to 10 years for reasons that I've explained. I think digital investments will only have one direction, and that's up. If we have any hope of sustaining our level of productivity, sustaining our competitiveness in this really in this global village.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question that Michael wrote in, asking, do you think any of the specific measures that Jacinda Ardern is putting in place are worth considering for Canada? Which ones do you think are most useful?
Well, I'd be speculating right now if I said anything. I'm not privy to any of that type of information. Um, But one thing I do wanna say is, back to that slide where I showed that savings should be pro-cyclical. That was a message not just for households, but for governments. Yes, Canada fiscally, we've done a better job than governments around the world, no question about it. But what I'd like to see is in good economic times, I'm just saying when this pandemic leaves us, okay, I'm talking about the future here, that governments around the world start saving more in good economic times and build a buffer, build a budget, a rainy day fund, so that when things do go wrong, when a recession hits, when a shock hits, they can go to their fiscal policy tool first rather than going to their monetary policy tool first. I think that striking a better balance between fiscal and monetary policy is the way of the future, I think. I think we've relied too heavily on low interest rates, and we know what happened here, right? It's fueled demand, it's fueled prices, it's fueled debt in the short run. And I think if we were able to strike a better balance in how we manage money, okay, and it all starts up top, right? We need to be leaders here and show the way, and governments need to show the way first. As I say, so all to say that even if Canada does it alone, and we balance our books fiscally, and we have all these surpluses, and we use fiscal policy more than monetary policy, it will still not be enough. Because if everybody else is cutting interest rates and we're not, we're keeping spending up and rates are slightly higher here, well, then capital flows into Canada, pushes the Canadian dollar up, and it damages our competitiveness. So we need a coordinated effort around the world. This can't be just something that Canada is doing. We need a coordinated effort. But so all to say that we need to strike a better balance there between fiscal and monetary policy.
Thank you. I'm going to ask, we're at 1:11, so I'm going to ask one last question coming in, and it's a question that I had as well. You talked about money laundering. So what are we doing to monitor money laundering in the housing market, and how bad is it in monetary terms?
So we don't have a lot of data on money laundering. We're now compiling a lot of that information. We've established some indicators in-house at CMHC that we are tracking. But we don't have the authority to enforce this, right? We need a coordinated effort among different levels of government. But in terms of how big it is, there have been some estimates released by different groups. For instance, in the last decade, I think there's an estimate that $10 billion worth of illicit money flowed into Ontario, into the Toronto area. Again, it's one estimate, but we do need more data to understand how big of a problem this is, and to help inform what type of policy should be implemented. But as I say, would I be starting with money laundering first? No, I would be probably more keen on getting more supply out the door, ensuring that there's enough supply to meet demand longer term. In the short term, I would be more concerned about managing the demand side. And I think, as I say, we will be seeing some response, hopefully. So I think that, there's no silver bullet here. I think we need to keep our eye on a number of factors.
Well, Ted and Robert, I thank you so much for all of this knowledge and insight that you shared. You certainly changed my perspective. I live up in the Vaughan Richmond Hill area, and as I drive by and see all these townhouses under construction, I've looked at it sadly, but I'm gonna smile the next time I drive by and know that they're doing a good thing for us. So thank you for being here with us. Thank you for sharing your insight, and we wish you well. We'll ask you to say goodbye, and you can turn off your cameras and mics, and we just have a couple of closing questions for our audience.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. So for our audience, if you do have a moment and can just type into the Q&A Any aspects of today's sessions that you found particularly meaningful or helpful, it's always good for us to get a sense of your experience, and that guides us in our future planning. So please feel free to utilize the Q&A function to let us know what was meaningful, what was useful to you. And if there's other aspects that you'd like to know, please feel free to share that with us. We promised you a quick competition to see who was going to win a $50 gift card to the York University bookstore. So there's a poll that's about to pop up, and you can answer it. So York has a number of partners that offer benefits and services to York alumni and our community. So which York University affinity partner would you call upon to help walk you through all of your home insurance options? TD Insurance Monex, one of our partners, Manulife Financial, another one of our partners, or MBNA, another one of our partners. So choose the one that makes sense for you. And it should be ending soon. We will notify the winner after the event via email. So good luck to you all. Okay. The poll's closed. The answer was, it was a close call. TD Insurance is the York University partner that we partner with on our home and auto insurance program. So that was the answer to that question. Okay. By way of wrap up, please feel free to share today's talk with your friends. It will be posted on our York University Alumni YouTube channel. Please feel free to join our LinkedIn group or follow us on Facebook by searching York University Alumni. And if you're looking for us on Instagram and Twitter, we're at YorkU Alumni. We love hearing from you. Your feedback is welcome. You can reach us at alumni@yorku.ca or on our social channels to give us any feedback or suggestions for future events. For everything that we are doing, we post everything on our website, yorku.ca/alumni and friends. We are building events and services to support specifically our young alumni community, and we'd love to hear your suggestions of perks and programs that can complement what we're already offering. So thank you all for being with us, for staying with us. It's 16 minutes over time, but there were so many questions coming in that we didn't want to stop. We wish you all well and hope that you are healthy and safe and well during this time. Goodbye.